The bullet had missed Violet Zimmerman's head by less than an inch, and she knew that her late husband's creditors were done with warnings. Standing in the charred remains of what used to be her barn on the outskirts of Galesburg, Illinois, she clutched her 6-year-old daughter's hand and watched everything she had worked for turn to ash in the early morning light of June, 1878. The men who had set the fire were long gone, but their message remained crystal clear. Pay what Henry owed or lose everything, including her life. Violet had been a widow for 3 months, and in that time, she had learned more about her husband's secrets than she had discovered in 5 years of marriage. Henry Zimmerman had been a gambler, a liar, and apparently a thief who had borrowed money from some very dangerous men in Chicago. When he died falling off his horse drunk one February night, he left her with a 6-year-old daughter, a small ranch with 20 cattle, and debts that would take a lifetime to repay. The morning was cold despite it being summer, and little Sarah shivered against her mother's worn cotton dress. Violet looked down at her daughter's frightened face and felt something harden in her chest. She would not let these men take everything. She would not let her daughter grow up with nothing, the way she had after her own parents died in a typhoid outbreak when she was 15. "Mama, where will the cows sleep now?" Sarah's voice was small and scared. "We will figure it out, sweetheart," Violet said, though she had no idea how. The barn had housed not just the cattle, but all their feed, their tools, and the small amount of savings she had managed to hide from the creditors. She had foolishly believed that hiding her money in the barn's support beam was safer than keeping it in the house. Now that money was gone too, turned to ash along with everything else. She heard the sound of hooves and her whole body tensed. Her hand instinctively went to the rifle she had propped against a remaining fence post, but when she turned, she saw it was just one rider. A man on a large chestnut horse was approaching slowly, his hands visible and away from his sides in a gesture of peace. Violet kept her hand near the rifle anyway. The man dismounted about 20 feet away, his movements careful and deliberate. He was tall, with dark hair that touched his collar and a face weathered by sun and wind. His clothes were clean but worn, the clothes of a working rancher, and his boots had seen better days. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, and his eyes were a striking pale blue that seemed to take in everything at once. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice deep and respectful. "Name is Patrick Young. I own the property about 3 miles east of here. I saw the smoke last night and wanted to come check if everyone was all right." Violet straightened her spine and lifted her chin. "We are fine, Mr. Young. Thank you for your concern." His eyes traveled over the destroyed barn, the frightened child clutching her mother's skirts, and the single rifle that stood between them and whatever came next. "Respectfully, madam, it does not look fine. It looks like someone burned your barn down on purpose." "That is none of your business," Violet said, her voice sharp. She knew she sounded ungrateful, but she could not afford to appear weak. Weakness in this territory meant death or worse. Patrick held up his hands again. "You are right, and I apologize for overstepping. I just wanted to make sure you and your little one were safe. Are the cattle all right?" Despite herself, Violet felt her eyes burn with tears she refused to shed. "The cattle scattered. I spent all night trying to round them up, but I could only find 12. The rest are gone, probably stolen or run off too far to track." Patrick nodded slowly. "That is a hard loss. I am sorry." "I do not need your pity, Mr. Young." Violet's voice came out harsher than she intended, but she could not help it. Pity was just another word for charity, and charity was for people who had given up. She had not given up, not yet. Something shifted in Patrick's expression, a flash of understanding that surprised her. "Good," he said simply. Pity would not do you any good anyway. But a business proposition might. Violet frowned, her guard going up even higher. What kind of proposition? I have a ranch, like I said. Decent size, about 200 head of cattle, good grazing land, access to water. But I am just one man and I cannot manage it all on my own. I have been looking to expand, maybe start breeding horses too, but I need help. Real help, not just hired hands who will leave at the first sign of trouble or better wages somewhere else. And what does that have to do with me? Violet asked, though her heart was starting to beat faster. I heard in town that you were managing this place on your own after your husband passed. Heard you were doing a good job of it too, until these recent troubles started. That tells me you know how to work a ranch, how to manage livestock, how to keep things running. That is a rare skill, especially for someone who is willing to put in the hard work. I still do not understand what you are proposing, Mr. Young. Patrick took a step closer, and Violet noticed that Sarah had stopped shaking and was peeking out at the stranger with curious eyes. I am proposing a partnership, Mrs. Zimmerman. You and your daughter move to my ranch, you help me run it and expand it, and in return you get a full 50% share of the profits. You would have your own house on the property, your own space, and your own say in how things are run. It would not be charity, it would be a business arrangement between equals. Violet stared at him, certain she had misheard. 50%? That is absurd. Why would you offer me half of everything when I would be coming with nothing? You would not be coming with nothing, Patrick said firmly. You would be coming with knowledge, experience, and a willingness to work hard. Those are worth more than money to me. Plus, you have cattle still, even if it is just 12 head now. Those would become part of the ranch assets too. It was too good to be true, which meant there had to be a catch. There was always a catch. What do you really want from me, Mr. Young? Patrick met her eyes steadily. I want a partner who will care about the ranch as much as I do because it is theirs too. I want someone who knows what they are doing and will not need me to hold their hand through every decision. And I want to do the right thing, if I am being honest. I see a woman and a child about to lose everything through no fault of their own, and I have the means to help in a way that benefits us both. That seems like the smart thing to do and the right thing to do all at once. Violet wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to grab onto this lifeline with both hands, but years of disappointment and betrayal had taught her to be cautious. I would need to see the property first. I would need to know exactly what you expect from me. And I would need everything in writing, legal and binding. For the first time, Patrick smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and genuine. I would not have it any other way, Mrs. Zimmerman. When would you like to come see the place? Today, Violet said firmly. Right now, if possible. I have nothing keeping me here anymore. Patrick glanced at the destroyed barn and nodded. All right then. Let me help you gather what you can carry, and we will ride over to my place. Your daughter can ride with me if that is all right with you. Sarah looked up at her mother with hopeful eyes, and Violet felt her resolve waver. She had been trying so hard to protect her daughter, to keep her safe and secure, but maybe this was the answer they needed. Maybe, just this once, accepting help would not be the same as giving up. Her name is Sarah, Violet said quietly. And yes, she can ride with you. The ride to Patrick's ranch took longer than 3 miles because Violet insisted on herding her 12 remaining cattle along with them. Patrick did not complain, just helped her move the animals at their own pace while Sarah sat in front of him on his saddle, chattering away about her favorite cow named Buttercup. When they finally crested a small hill and Patrick's ranch came into view, Violet felt her breath catch in her throat. The property was bigger than he had let on, with a sturdy 2-story house painted white with green shutters, a large barn that looked newly built, several corrals full of healthy-looking cattle, and in the distance, acres of fenced grazing land that stretched toward a line of trees that marked a water source. "This is your ranch?" Violet asked, unable to keep the awe from her voice. "This is our ranch if you agree to the partnership," Patrick corrected gently. "That small house over there, the one near the oak tree, that would be yours and Sarah's. It used to be my parents' house before they passed a few years back. It has been sitting empty, but it is sound and dry, has 2 bedrooms, a good stove, and a well nearby." The house he pointed to was small but charming, with a covered porch and window boxes that had once held flowers. It was more than Violet had dared to hope for, and that scared her. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked again, needing to understand. "There must be a dozen men in town who would jump at a chance for a partnership like this. Why offer it to a widow with a child and a pile of debt?" Patrick was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft enough that Sarah could not hear from where she was now petting his horse's neck. "Because 3 years ago, my sister found herself in a similar situation. Her husband died, left her with 2 small children and nothing else. She had to go begging to our uncle for help, and he made her feel like dirt for needing it, made her work like a slave for him while barely feeding her or her kids. She died last winter of pneumonia, too worn down to fight it off. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in her position, I would do it in a way that let them keep their dignity. This partnership is real, Mrs. Zimmerman. I need the help and you need the opportunity. It is as simple as that." Violet felt tears threaten again, but this time she let one slip down her cheek. "I am sorry about your sister." "Me too," Patrick said, "but maybe we can make something good come from something bad. That seems worth doing." They spent the rest of the morning going over the ranch in detail. Patrick showed her the breeding records for his cattle, explained his plans for expanding into horses, and walked her through the financial books with a transparency that shocked her. He really was offering her a full partnership, not just a job with fancy words attached to it. The house that would be hers was dusty but solid, with good bones and plenty of space. Sarah immediately claimed the smaller bedroom, delighted by the window that looked out over the barn where she could see the animals. Violet stood in the main room and tried to imagine building a life here, tried to imagine trusting this stranger who seemed too good to be real. "I need to be honest with you about something," Violet said as they walked back toward the main house. Sarah was running ahead of them, chasing a butterfly through the grass. "My husband owed money to some very dangerous men in Chicago. They are the ones who burned my barn. They want $5,000 and I do not have it. If I enter into a partnership with you, those men might come after this ranch too. You would be putting yourself at risk." Patrick's expression darkened. "How much time do they give you to pay?" "They did not give me time. They just said pay or die. The barn burning was their way of showing me they were serious. And if you could pay them, would they leave you alone? I think so. They are businessmen in their own twisted way. They want their money, not vengeance." Patrick was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said something that made Violet's heart stop. "The ranch can afford to loan you $5,000. You would pay it back out of your share of the profits, no interest, as much time as you need. We send those men their money, get them out of your life, and then we focus on building this partnership into something profitable for both of us." "No," Violet said immediately, her pride flaring. "Absolutely not. I cannot take that kind of money from you." "It would not be taking. It would be a business loan," Patrick argued. "You cannot be a proper partner if you are always looking over your shoulder waiting for those men to come back. We eliminate the threat and then we move forward. It makes good business sense." "It makes you incredibly vulnerable to me taking advantage of you." Violet shot back. You do not know me, Mr. Young. You do not know if I am honest or if I will take your money and disappear. You do not know if I am actually good at ranch work or if I have just been fooling people. You are talking about risking everything on a stranger. Patrick stopped walking and turned to face her fully. You are right. I do not know you well, but I know you spent all night trying to save your cattle instead of running away. I know you are more worried about me taking a risk on you than you are about your own safety. I know you have a daughter who looks at you like you hung the moon, which means you are doing something very right as a mother. Those things tell me enough. So what do you say, Mrs. Zimmerman? Will you be my partner? Violet looked at this man who was offering her salvation without asking for anything but hard work in return. She looked at the ranch spread out before them, solid and real and full of possibility. She looked at Sarah, laughing as she chased butterflies, happier than she had been in months. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Yes, Violet said, her voice steady despite the emotion swirling in her chest. Yes, I will be your partner, Mr. Young. And I swear to you, I will work harder than anyone you have ever met to make sure you do not regret this decision. Patrick held out his hand, and Violet shook it firmly. His hand was calloused and strong, the hand of a man who knew hard work. I do not think I will regret it for a second. And please call me Patrick. Partners should use first names. Then call me Violet, she said, and for the first time in months she felt something like hope bloom in her chest. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Patrick took Violet into town to meet with a lawyer, and they drew up official partnership papers that spelled out exactly what each of them was bringing to the arrangement and how profits would be split. The lawyer, an older man named Mr. Jacobson, seemed surprised by the terms but approved of how thoroughly they were protecting both parties. While they were in town, Patrick also arranged for a bank draft for $5,000 to be sent to the address Violet provided for her late husband's creditors in Chicago. The money would be accompanied by a letter from Mr. Jacobson stating that the debt was paid in full, and any further harassment would result in legal action. It would not eliminate the danger completely, but it should buy them peace. Violet watched Patrick sign the bank draft with a sick feeling in her stomach. That was so much money, more than she had ever seen at once in her life, and he was giving it to her on nothing but faith. She vowed silently that she would pay back every cent, even if it took her the rest of her life. Patrick must have seen something in her face because he touched her arm gently. Stop looking like that. This is an investment in our partnership, nothing more. You would do the same for me if our positions were reversed. I hope I would, Violet admitted. But I am not sure I would have the courage. Then it is a good thing you are learning from my bad example, Patrick said with a small smile. Come on, let us go to the general store. You and Sarah will need some supplies for your house, and we should stock up on feed before winter. At the general store, Violet was painfully aware of the looks they were getting from the other townspeople. A young widow and a single rancher, working together so closely, it was bound to cause talk. She kept her chin high and ignored the whispers, focusing instead on making a list of essentials they would need. The store owner, a plump woman named Mrs. Henderson, was more direct than most. Heard you two are going into business together, she said as she measured out flour. That is quite unusual. It is a good business arrangement, Patrick said calmly, not rising to the bait. Mrs. Zimmerman has skills I need and I have resources she needs. Seems like a sensible partnership to me. I suppose, Mrs. Henderson said, clearly disappointed by the lack of drama. Still, people will talk. People always talk, Violet said with more confidence than she felt. We will just have to give them nothing interesting to talk about. By the time they returned to the ranch, it was late afternoon, and Sarah had fallen asleep in the back of the wagon, exhausted from the excitement of the day. Patrick carried her into the house Violet now thought of as theirs while Violet started unpacking supplies. "Let her rest," Patrick said as he emerged from the house. "You look like you could use some rest too." "There is too much to do," Violet protested, but even she could hear how tired she sounded. "The work will still be here tomorrow," Patrick said firmly. "You have been running on nerves and fear for months now. Give yourself permission to breathe." Violet wanted to argue, but she was so tired down to her bones in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. "Just for an hour," she conceded. "Then I need to check on the cattle." "I will check on the cattle," Patrick said. "You rest." Violet woke to darkness and panic. She shot up from the bed, disoriented and terrified, until she remembered where she was. Sarah was sleeping peacefully in the next room, and through the window Violet could see lantern light coming from the main barn. Patrick was still working. She splashed water on her face from the basin, angry at herself for sleeping so long. She had promised to be a partner, not a burden, and here she was napping while Patrick did all the work. She pulled on her boots and headed out into the cool night air. The barn was warm and smelled of hay and animals. Patrick was in one of the stalls checking on a cow that looked ready to give birth any day. He looked up when he heard her footsteps and smiled. "You are supposed to be resting." "I have rested enough," Violet said. "How is she?" "Restless. I think she will go into labor tonight or tomorrow morning." "Have you helped with births before?" "Many times," Violet said, moving closer to examine the cow. "Henry might not have been good for much, but he did teach me about cattle. This one is a first-timer, I think. See how nervous she is." Patrick nodded, impressed. "You have a good eye. Yes, it is her first calf. I have been checking on her every few hours." "I can take a turn," Violet offered. "You must be exhausted too." They fell into an easy rhythm, trading off checks on the expectant cow while taking care of other evening chores. Patrick showed Violet his system for tracking which animals needed attention and which were thriving. She shared some tricks her father had taught her before he died, ways of reading animal behavior that could prevent problems before they started. It was near midnight when the cow finally went into labor. Violet and Patrick worked side by side, helping guide the calf into the world when it became clear the birth was not progressing as it should. Patrick's hands were steady and sure, and Violet found herself trusting his judgment completely as they carefully repositioned the calf. When the little bull finally slipped free, wet and wobbling, Violet felt tears of relief stream down her face. The mother cow immediately began cleaning her baby, and the sound of the calf's first bleating cry was the most beautiful thing Violet had heard in a long time. "We did it," Patrick said, his voice full of wonder. He was covered in blood and birth fluid, his hair sticking up at odd angles, and he was grinning like a boy on Christmas morning. "We did," Violet agreed, and suddenly she was laughing, great big belly laughs that shook her whole body. Patrick joined in, and for several minutes they just stood there in the barn, laughing and crying and celebrating the simple miracle of new life. When they finally calmed down, Patrick looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You are good at this," he said softly. "Really good. I am lucky to have you as a partner." Violet felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the physical labor. "I am the lucky one," she said honestly. "You gave me a chance when no one else would." "We gave each other a chance," Patrick corrected. "That is what makes it a real partnership." Over the next few weeks, Violet threw herself into the work of the ranch with an intensity that sometimes worried Patrick. She was up before dawn every day, working until long after dark, learning every inch of the property and every detail of the operation. She reorganized the breeding records, implemented a new rotation system for the grazing areas, and even started plans for a vegetable garden near her house. Patrick watched her work with a mixture of admiration and concern. She was brilliant at ranch management, seeing connections and opportunities he had missed, but she was also driving herself into the ground. He knew she was trying to prove her worth, trying to justify the faith he had placed in her. But he worried she was going to make herself sick. One morning in early July, he found her in the barn before sunrise, already mucking out stalls even though that was supposed to be his job for the day. "Violet," he said gently, "what are you doing?" She looked up, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. "The stalls needed cleaning. I had time, so I started." "You are supposed to be sleeping during this time," Patrick pointed out. "We agreed on schedules so we could both get rest." "I could not sleep," Violet admitted. "I kept thinking about the hay stores and whether we ordered enough for winter." Patrick set down the bucket he was carrying and moved closer. "Violet, we have plenty of hay. You made sure of that yourself last week. What is really going on?" For a moment he thought she was going to brush him off, but then her shoulders sagged. "I am terrified," she whispered. "I am terrified that I am going to fail, that you are going to realize you made a mistake with me, that those men from Chicago are going to come back, that Sarah and I will end up with nothing again. So I work, because at least when I am working I feel like I have some control." Patrick felt his heart clench. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he rested his hand on her shoulder. "You are not going to fail. You have already proven yourself 10 times over, and even if something did go wrong, we would face it together." "That is what partners do." Violet looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Why are you so good to me? What are you getting out of this arrangement that makes it worth being so patient?" "I am getting an incredible partner who has doubled our efficiency in less than a month," Patrick said honestly. "I am getting someone who cares about this ranch and these animals as much as I do. And if I am being completely honest, I am getting a friend, which is something I did not realize I needed until you showed up." "A friend," Violet repeated softly, testing the word. "I would like that. I have not had a real friend in a long time." "Then it is settled," Patrick said with a smile. "We are partners and friends, which means you are allowed to trust me and stop trying to prove yourself. You have already proven everything you need to prove." Things shifted after that conversation. Violet still worked hard, but she stopped pushing herself to the point of exhaustion. She started accepting Patrick's help when he offered it instead of insisting she could do everything herself. They developed a comfortable rhythm of working together, anticipating each other's needs and covering each other's weaknesses. Sarah blossomed in the stable environment, making friends with all the animals and following Patrick around like a devoted shadow whenever Violet was busy. Patrick discovered he enjoyed having the little girl around, teaching her about the animals and listening to her endless questions about everything from why cows had 4 stomachs to where the stars went during the day. One evening in late July, after Sarah had gone to bed, Violet and Patrick sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It had become their habit to spend an hour like this at the end of each day, reviewing what had been accomplished and planning for tomorrow. "I got a letter today," Violet said quietly, "from Mr. Jacobson. The men in Chicago confirmed they received the payment and consider the debt settled. They will not be bothering us anymore." Patrick felt relief wash over him. "That is wonderful news. How do you feel?" "Free," Violet said with wonder in her voice. "For the first time since Henry died, I feel like I can breathe properly. Like there is not a weight sitting on my chest waiting to crush me." "You deserve to feel that way all the time," Patrick said. "You deserve to be happy, Violet." She turned to look at him, and in the fading light her face was soft and open in a way he had never seen before. "I am starting to believe that might be possible," she admitted. "Being here, working with you, it has shown me that life does not have to be a constant struggle just to survive, that there can be joy in the work and peace at the end of the day." Patrick felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of feelings he had been trying to ignore for weeks now. Violet was beautiful, not just in appearance but in spirit. She was strong and capable and fierce in her protection of those she loved. She made him laugh with her dry observations about the absurdities of life, and she made him think with her clever solutions to problems. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped being just a business partner and had become someone he looked forward to seeing every morning, someone whose happiness mattered to him more than his own. But she was vulnerable right now, still recovering from trauma and loss. The last thing Patrick wanted was to take advantage of her gratitude or her need for security. So he kept his growing feelings to himself and just said, "I am glad you feel that way. You and Sarah have brought life back to this place. It was just a ranch before you came. Now it feels like a home." Violet smiled, and Patrick thought that smile alone was worth every risk he had taken. "It does feel like home," she agreed. "I never thought I would feel that way anywhere again." August brought a heat wave that had everyone moving slowly and seeking shade whenever possible. The cattle were restless, and Patrick and Violet spent long days ensuring all the animals had access to water and were not suffering from the extreme temperatures. One particularly brutal afternoon, Violet was working to repair a section of fence that had been damaged by a fallen branch when she suddenly felt dizzy. The world tilted sideways, and she grabbed onto a fence post to keep from falling. Patrick, who had been working a few yards away, was at her side in an instant. "Violet, what is wrong? Just the heat," she managed to say, though black spots were dancing in her vision. "I am fine." "You are not fine," Patrick said firmly. He scooped her up in his arms before she could protest and started walking toward the creek. "You are overheated and probably dehydrated. We are taking a break whether you like it or not." Violet wanted to argue, but the world was spinning too much for her to form coherent words. She let her head rest against Patrick's shoulder and focused on breathing while he carried her to the shade of the large willow tree by the creek. He set her down gently in the grass and immediately soaked his bandana in the cool creek water, wringing it out before pressing it to her forehead and neck. The cold was shocking and wonderful at the same time. "Drink," Patrick ordered, holding his canteen to her lips. Violet drank obediently, and gradually the world stopped spinning quite so violently. "I am sorry," she mumbled when she could finally speak clearly. "That was stupid of me." "It was not stupid, it was human," Patrick said, though his face was tight with worry. "Even you have limits, Violet. You need to remember that." "I just wanted to get the fence done before dark," she explained weakly. "The fence can wait. You cannot." Patrick kept the cool cloth on her neck, and Violet became acutely aware of how close he was, how gentle his hands were, how his eyes were full of concern that went beyond simple partnership. Her heart started beating faster for reasons that had nothing to do with heat exhaustion. "Patrick," she said softly, and he met her eyes. For a long moment they just looked at each other, and Violet saw her own confused feelings reflected back at her. When had this man become so important to her? When had she started looking for him first thing every morning and feeling disappointed when evening came and they had to part ways? Patrick cleared his throat and pulled back, breaking the moment. "You should rest here for a bit. I will go get Sarah and tell her you are all right so she does not worry." He left before Violet could respond, and she was grateful for the space to collect herself. This was dangerous territory she was wandering into. Patrick had been nothing but kind and respectful to her, but that did not mean he had romantic feelings for her. He had offered her a business partnership, and she needed to remember that. The last thing she wanted was to make things awkward by developing feelings that were not returned. But as she sat there by the creek, watching the water flow past, she could not deny the truth anymore. She was falling in love with Patrick Young, and she had no idea what to do about it. September brought cooler temperatures and the hard work of preparing for winter. Patrick and Violet worked from dawn to dusk, storing hay, reinforcing buildings against winter storms, and making sure all the animals were healthy and strong enough to survive the cold months ahead. They had fallen into patterns of domesticity that sometimes caught Violet off guard. Patrick often joined her and Sarah for dinner in their little house, helping Sarah with her letters while Violet cooked. Other times Violet would cook in the main house's larger kitchen, and the three of them would eat together like a family. Sarah had started calling Patrick Uncle Patrick, and neither adult had the heart to correct her. The little girl adored him, and Patrick was patient and kind with her in a way that made Violet's heart ache. Henry had never been cruel to Sarah, but he had never really paid attention to her either. Seeing Sarah blossom under Patrick's gentle guidance was healing something in Violet she had not even known was broken. One evening in late September, Patrick came to dinner looking troubled. Violet noticed immediately but waited until Sarah was in bed before asking what was wrong. "I ran into Robert Morrison in town today," Patrick said, referring to a rancher who lived about 10 miles south. "He told me there has been talk about us, about our arrangement." Violet felt her stomach drop. "What kind of talk?" "The kind you would expect when an unmarried man and an unmarried woman are living and working so closely together," Patrick said carefully. "Nothing truly vicious yet, but Morrison thought I should know that tongues are wagging." "I see." Violet's voice was cold and hard. "And what do you want to do about it? Would you like me to leave, find another arrangement?" "What? No." Patrick looked genuinely shocked. "Violet, I do not care what people say. I am only telling you because you have a right to know what is being said about you. And because I want to protect you from any harm that gossip might cause. There is no way to protect me from gossip except to give them what they want, which is for me to disappear or become some man's wife," Violet said bitterly. "I have worked so hard to build something here, and it is not fair that it could all be destroyed just because small-minded people cannot imagine a man and woman working together without there being something improper about it." Patrick moved closer, his expression intense. "You are right, it is not fair, but you are not going anywhere and we are not changing anything about how we run this ranch. Let people talk. We know the truth and that is what matters." "The truth," Violet repeated hollowly. "And what is the truth, Patrick? What are we?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Patrick looked at her for a long moment and Violet saw a war playing out behind his eyes. "We are partners," he finally said, "and friends, and that should be enough for anyone." It should be enough, Violet thought, but it was not. Not for her. She wanted more, wanted things she had no right to want, wanted to tell Patrick that when he smiled at her, the whole world seemed brighter. She wanted to tell him that she had started imagining a future where they were more than just business partners, where they were a real family. But she could not risk their partnership by confessing feelings he might not share, so she just nodded and said, "You are right. That should be enough for anyone." October brought the first frost and news that made Patrick's jaw clench with anger. The bank in Galesburg had failed, taking with it the savings of dozens of local farmers and ranchers. Patrick and Violet were fortunate. Most of their assets were in land and cattle, not cash. But many of their neighbors were facing ruin. "We need to help them," Violet said as they sat at Patrick's kitchen table, looking at the list of affected families. We cannot save everyone, Patrick said practically, though his face showed how much he wished they could. We have responsibilities to our own operation. But we can do something, Violet insisted. The Johnsons, they have young children and they just lost everything. And the Martins, they are elderly, they cannot start over at their age. Patrick, we have more than we need, we have to share it. Patrick looked at her and his expression softened. Your heart is going to bankrupt us someday, he said, but there was no heat in his words. All right, we help who we can, but we do it smart as investments or loans, not charity. People around here are too proud for charity. Violet smiled, recognizing the echo of her own words from months ago. Spoken like someone who understands pride. Over the next few weeks, Patrick and Violet quietly reached out to their struggling neighbors, offering loans, bartering cattle for labor, and creating arrangements that would help people get through the winter without losing their land. They were careful to structure everything as business deals, allowing people to keep their dignity while still getting the help they needed. Word spread of their generosity, and suddenly, the gossip about their unusual arrangement had a different tone. People started calling them the salvation of the community, partners who cared more about their neighbors than about profit. I think you saved me from becoming bitter, Patrick said one evening as they reviewed the list of families they had helped. I was so focused on building this ranch and protecting what was mine that I had forgotten about looking out for others. You reminded me what is really important. You did the same for me, Violet said softly. When you offered me that partnership, you showed me that there are still good people in the world. People who do the right thing because it is right, not because they expect something in return. Patrick reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that was both comforting and electric. We make a good team, Violet Zimmerman. We do, Violet agreed, her heart pounding at the simple touch. A very good team. Neither of them pulled away, and they sat there in the lamplight, hands joined, until Sarah called for her mother and broke the spell. Winter arrived with a vengeance in late November, bringing snow and ice that transformed the ranch into a frozen landscape. Patrick and Violet worked even more closely together during this time, often spending hours in the barns making sure the animals were warm and fed. One particularly brutal night, a blizzard blew in without warning while Violet was checking on the cattle in the far barn. Patrick waited for her in the main house, watching the snow fall thicker and faster, worrying when she did not return at her usual time. When another hour passed with no sign of her, he bundled up and headed out into the storm. The wind was vicious, and visibility was nearly zero. He called her name over and over, fighting his way toward the far barn, terror making his heart race. He found her halfway between the far barn and the main house, struggling against the wind with her coat pulled tight around her. She looked up at the sound of his voice, relief flooding her face. I got turned around, she shouted over the wind. I could not find the house. Patrick grabbed her hand and pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her to share body heat and stability. Stay with me, he commanded, and together they fought their way back to the main house. Once inside, they stood in the entryway dripping melting snow and breathing hard. Violet was shaking, and Patrick realized it was from cold and shock. He quickly built up the fire and wrapped her in blankets, making her sit close to the warmth. That was foolish of me, Violet said through chattering teeth. I know better than to get disoriented like that. It was the storm's fault, not yours, Patrick said, rubbing her arms to help warm her faster. Conditions like that can confuse anyone. I am just glad I found you. Violet looked up at him, and there was something raw and open in her expression that made Patrick's breath catch. I was scared, she admitted. Not of freezing, though that was part of it. I was scared of never seeing you or Sarah again. Of never getting to tell you. She stopped herself, biting her lip. Tell me what? Patrick asked softly, his hands stilling on her arms. Violet closed her eyes, gathering her courage. When she opened them again, her gaze was steady and sure. That I love you. That somewhere along the way, you stopped being just my business partner and became the most important person in my world. That I think about you all the time and I look for excuses to be near you and I dream about a future where we are more than just partners. Patrick felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. Violet, I know, she interrupted, pulling away from him. I know you did not sign up for this. You offered me a business arrangement and I am ruining it with inappropriate feelings. I am sorry. I will try to keep them to myself from now on. I just needed you to know, in case I had died out there, I needed you to know that someone loved you. Patrick caught her hands before she could retreat further. You did not let me finish. I was going to say, Violet, I have been in love with you since July. Since that day you nearly collapsed from heat exhaustion, and I realized that the thought of losing you made me feel like I could not breathe. Violet stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. You love me. Desperately, Patrick confirmed, a laugh bubbling up from the relief of finally saying it out loud. I have been trying so hard not to take advantage of you, not to pressure you when you were vulnerable, that I never considered you might feel the same way. I do, Violet said, her voice breaking with emotion. I feel exactly the same way. Patrick cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away the tears that had started streaming down her cheeks. Can I kiss you? He asked, wanting to be sure, wanting her full consent. Yes, Violet breathed, and then his lips were on hers and the world disappeared. The kiss was everything gentle and fierce, tender and desperate, full of months of suppressed longing and newfound hope. Patrick pulled her closer and Violet melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt as if she was afraid he might disappear. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Patrick rested his forehead against hers. I want to marry you, he said, the words tumbling out before he could second-guess them. I want you to be my wife, not just my partner. I want to adopt Sarah and give her my name. I want to build a life with you that is real and permanent, but only if that is what you want. I will never pressure you, never make you feel obligated because of the partnership or the financial arrangements. If you just want to keep things as they are, I will respect that. Violet laughed, the sound bright and joyful. Patrick Young, you are the most honorable, frustrating, wonderful man I have ever met. Yes, I will marry you. Yes to all of it, because I want the same things you want, and I cannot imagine spending the rest of my life with anyone else. Patrick kissed her again, longer this time, savoring the taste of her and the feel of her in his arms. When they finally pulled apart, he said, We should probably tell Sarah. She is going to be impossible, Violet said with a smile. She has been asking me for weeks when I was going to marry Uncle Patrick so we could all live together properly. Smart girl, Patrick said, grinning. She gets that from her mother. They decided to wait until after the blizzard passed to tell Sarah, wanting to share the news when they could all celebrate together properly. But the next morning, when Violet returned to her little house, Sarah took one look at her mother's glowing face and said, You are going to marry Uncle Patrick. Violet laughed in surprise. How did you know? Because you look happy the way princesses in stories look happy after the prince asks them to marry him, Sarah said matter-of-factly. Are we going to live in the big house now? Would you like that? Violet asked, sitting down and pulling her daughter into her lap. Yes, Sarah said firmly. Uncle Patrick is the best, and I want him to be my papa for real, not just pretend. Then that is what we will do, Violet promised, holding her daughter close and marveling at how much life could change in less than a year. Patrick and Violet were married on a cold December day in the small church in Galesburg. The wedding was simple but beautiful, attended by the neighbors they had helped and the few friends they had made in the community. Sarah served as flower girl, taking her duties very seriously and only stopping once to pet a dog that had wandered into the church. Violet wore a simple blue dress that Patrick had bought for her as a wedding gift, and Patrick wore his best suit, looking handsome and slightly nervous as he waited for her to walk down the aisle. When Violet finally appeared, Patrick felt his breath catch. She was beautiful, not because of the dress or her carefully arranged hair, but because of the joy shining from her face. This was a woman who had been beaten down by life and had risen above it. This was a woman who had taken a terrible situation and turned it into something wonderful. This was the woman he loved with everything in him. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When it came time to exchange vows, Patrick took both of Violet's hands in his and said, "I vow to be your partner in all things, to respect your strength and support you in your struggles. I vow to love you and Sarah with everything I have, to build a home with you that is full of joy and laughter, and to face whatever comes our way together. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." Violet had tears streaming down her face as she replied, "I vow to be your equal partner, to work beside you and dream with you and build something beautiful with you. I vow to love you with my whole heart, to trust you with my fears and share with you my joys. You gave me hope when I had none, and you showed me that life could be good again. I promise to honor that gift every day for the rest of my life." The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and when Patrick kissed his bride, the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause. Sarah jumped up and down, shouting, "They are married," to anyone who would listen. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the main barn that had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. There was food and music and dancing, and Violet felt more purely happy than she could ever remember being. She danced with Patrick, with Sarah, with the kind neighbors who had accepted their unusual situation and supported them anyway. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left, Patrick found Violet standing outside the barn, looking up at the stars. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. "Impossibly happy," Violet confirmed, lacing her fingers through his where they rested on her stomach. "A year ago I was terrified and alone and convinced my life was over. Now I have you and a home and a future that looks bright. It feels like a miracle." "You created your own miracle," Patrick corrected. "You were brave enough to accept help, smart enough to work hard, and strong enough to let yourself love again. That is all you, Violet. You should be proud." Violet turned in his arms so she could see his face. "We created this together. That is what makes it so special. We are a team in business and in life." "The best team," Patrick agreed, leaning down to kiss her. "Now come on, Mrs. Young, let us go home." The sound of her new name made Violet smile. Mrs. Young. She was Mrs. Patrick Young now, and Sarah was in the process of being officially adopted to become Sarah Young. They were a real family, legally and spiritually, and in every way that mattered. The first year of their marriage was full of adjustments, both wonderful and challenging. Violet and Sarah moved into the main house with Patrick, and they had to figure out how to navigate living together as a family instead of as separate units. There were moments of friction. Violet was used to doing things her own way, and Patrick had his own established routines that he was reluctant to change. But they approached their marriage the same way they approached their business partnership, with honest communication, mutual respect, and a willingness to compromise. When they disagreed, they talked it through. When one of them was struggling, the other provided support. When they succeeded, they celebrated together. The ranch continued to thrive under their joint management. They expanded the cattle operation and began breeding horses as they had planned. Violet proved to have a real talent for working with horses, gentling even the most stubborn animals with patience and understanding. Patrick focused more on the business side, negotiating contracts and managing the finances. In the spring of 1879, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She was terrified at first. Her pregnancy with Sarah had been difficult, and giving birth had nearly killed her. But Patrick was endlessly supportive, hiring a doctor to come stay at the ranch for the last month of her pregnancy, and doing everything he could to reduce her stress and workload. Their son was born on a warm August morning, arriving quickly and with far less complication than Violet had feared. Patrick cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by the miracle of this small life that he and Violet had created together. They named him Peter, after Patrick's father, and Sarah immediately declared herself the best big sister in the entire world. Watching Patrick with their children gently rocking Peter to sleep, while helping Sarah sound out words from her primer, Violet felt her heart swell with love so intense it almost hurt. This was the life she had never dared to imagine, full of love and security and purpose. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter they named Victoria. Unlike Peter, who had been an easy baby, Victoria was colicky and demanding, keeping them up most nights with her crying. Patrick and Violet took turns walking her, singing to her, doing whatever they could to soothe her. They were exhausted and worn thin, but they faced it together, supporting each other through the difficult months. Sarah, now 10 years old, was a tremendous help with both children. She had Patrick's patience and Violet's practical nature, and she could often calm Victoria when no one else could. Violet watched her eldest daughter with pride, grateful that Sarah was growing up in a home full of love and stability, instead of the chaos and fear of her early childhood. The ranch expanded steadily over the years. Patrick and Violet became known throughout the region for their fair dealing and high-quality stock. They never forgot where they had started, and they continued to help neighbors who were struggling, always structuring their assistance as business arrangements that preserved dignity. In 1885, 7 years after they first met, Patrick and Violet sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Peter, now 6, was teaching 4-year-old Victoria how to skip stones in the pond, while Sarah, 15 and almost grown, read a book under the shade of an oak tree. "Do you ever regret it?" Violet asked suddenly. "Taking such a risk on me all those years ago?" Patrick looked at her in surprise. "Not for a single second. Why would you even ask that?" "I just wonder sometimes if you knew what you were getting into," Violet said with a small smile. 3 children, a wife who works as hard as any ranch hand, endless expenses and challenges. Is this the life you imagined for yourself? Patrick reached over and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "This life is better than anything I ever imagined. You and our children are the best thing that ever happened to me. Every risk was worth it. Every challenge made us stronger. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Violet felt tears prick her eyes, even after all these years, still overwhelmed sometimes by how much this man loved her. "I love you," she said softly, "more than I have words to express." "I know," Patrick said, squeezing her hand. "I feel the same way about you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sun set over the ranch they had built together. This was home, Violet thought. This was happiness. This was the life she had earned through courage and hard work, and a willingness to accept help when it was offered with genuine respect. As the years passed, their family continued to grow and thrive. Sarah eventually married a young school teacher named James and settled in Galesburg, close enough to visit regularly. Peter grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who loved the ranch as much as his parents did, and eventually took over much of the day-to-day management. Victoria surprised everyone by developing a passion for veterinary medicine and became one of the first female veterinarians in Illinois, always coming home to help with difficult animal cases. Patrick and Violet grew old together, their hair turning gray and their faces creasing with wrinkles earned from years of outdoor work and laughter. They still worked the ranch well into their 60s, though they had hired more help and delegated more responsibilities to Peter and his wife. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Patrick surprised Violet with a small ceremony renewing their vows. Surrounded by their children and grandchildren, they promised once again to love and support each other through whatever came their way. 30 years ago, you saved my life, Violet said, tears streaming down her face as she held her husband's weathered hands. You gave me hope when I had none and showed me that I was worth more than I believed. You have been my partner, my best friend, my love, and the father I always wanted for my children. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible, for believing in me when I could not believe in myself, and for loving me even when I was too proud to accept charity. Thank you for offering me a partnership instead. Patrick could barely speak through his own tears. Thank you for being brave enough to say yes. Thank you for working beside me, for building this life with me, for giving me a family I treasure more than anything in this world. You are the strongest, most remarkable woman I have ever known, and loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Their children and grandchildren cheered and cried, celebrating a love that had been built on mutual respect and partnership, that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger each time. As the celebration continued around them, Patrick pulled Violet close and whispered in her ear, "Best decision I ever made, offering you that partnership." Violet laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been the first time Patrick made her truly happy. Best decision I ever made was accepting it. They kissed then, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, and Violet thought about how a single moment of courage, his in offering help, hers in accepting it, had changed both their lives forever. The ranch continued to prosper, passing eventually to Peter and his children, but the main house always had a place for Patrick and Violet. They spent their final years exactly as they had spent the best years of their lives, together, working side by side, supporting each other, and loving each other with a devotion that inspired everyone who knew them. Patrick passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Violet holding his hand. She grieved deeply but without regret, grateful for every single day they had been given together. She lived another 3 years after him, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, telling stories about the early days of the ranch and the partnership that had become so much more. When Violet passed away at 81, she was buried next to Patrick under the old oak tree near the house they had shared. Their gravestone was simple, bearing both their names and a single phrase that Sarah had chosen: partners in life and love. The ranch remained in the family for generations, and the story of Patrick and Violet became family legend, how a cowboy had offered a desperate widow a partnership instead of charity, and how that partnership had grown into a love story that stood the test of time. Their descendants told the story to each new generation, using it as an example of what real love looked like: respectful, equal, built on trust and mutual support. The small house where Violet and Sarah had first lived when they came to the ranch was preserved and maintained, a reminder of humble beginnings and the courage it took to accept help with dignity. Young couples in the family would sometimes stay there, hoping that some of that original partnership magic would bless their own marriages. Years turned to decades, and the world changed dramatically. Illinois grew and modernized. The Wild West became just history, and ranching evolved with technology and changing markets. But the values that Patrick and Violet had built their partnership on, honesty, hard work, mutual respect, and unwavering support, those remained constant through every generation. On the 100th anniversary of Patrick and Violet's original partnership agreement, the family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Peter's great-granddaughter, a young woman also named Violet who was now running the ranch with her husband, stood before the assembled relatives and read from the original partnership papers that had been carefully preserved. This agreement, entered into on this day in June of 1878, establishes a full and equal partnership between Patrick Young and Violet Zimmerman for the management and operation of the Young Ranch, she read, her voice steady and proud. Both parties agree to contribute their full efforts and skills, to share equally in profits and losses, and to make all major decisions jointly with mutual respect and consideration. She looked up from the yellowed paper, her eyes shining. These words are as relevant today as they were 100 years ago. Great-great-grandpa Patrick and great-great-grandma Violet showed us that the best partnerships, whether in business or in love, are built on seeing each other as equals, on respecting each other's strengths, and on supporting each other through challenges. They started with a simple business agreement and created a legacy of love that has shaped our entire family. The gathered relatives applauded, many wiping away tears. They raised glasses to toast the memory of the couple who had started it all, whose courage and love had created something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting over the grazing land, ranch workers swore they could see two figures sitting on the porch of the old main house, hands linked and heads close together, well, no one was surprised. Some love was strong enough to echo through time itself, a reminder that the best partnerships were the ones where both people lifted each other up, where pride was respected and dignity preserved, where help was offered with honor and accepted with courage. Patrick and Violet's story was one of survival and hope, of second chances and hard work, of a pride that could have destroyed, but instead was channeled into building something beautiful. It was a story of the Wild West, but more than that, it was a story of what love could be when it was built on the right foundation, not passion alone, though they had plenty of that, but on mutual respect, true partnership, and an unwavering commitment to facing life together as equals. Their love story became the heart of the ranch, the foundation that everything else was built upon. And through generations of changing times and evolving challenges, that heart kept beating strong, a testament to two people who had been brave enough to trust each other when they both had every reason to be afraid. In the end, Patrick had been right. The partnership had been the best decision either of them ever made. Not because of the financial success, or the thriving ranch, or even the beautiful family they created together, but because in offering and accepting that partnership, they had found something infinitely more valuable. A love that was true and lasting. A love that transformed two broken, lonely people into a force that could weather any storm. That was the real legacy of Patrick and Violet Young, not the land or the cattle or the money, but the proof that with courage, respect, and genuine partnership, two people could build something that lasted forever. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that the best kind of help was the kind that preserved dignity, that the strongest foundations were built on equality, and that true love was not about one person saving another, but about two people choosing to save each other, every single day, through the simple act of being partners in every sense of the word. And so the story lived on, passed down through the generations, a reminder that even in the hardest of times, even when pride threatened to isolate and fear threatened to destroy, there was always hope. There was always the possibility that someone would offer not charity, but partnership. And there was always the chance that accepting that partnership with courage and dignity could transform two lives into something extraordinary. Patrick and Violet's love story proved that the Wild West was not just about gunfights and cattle drives and taming the land. It was also about people finding each other against impossible odds, about building families and communities and legacies that lasted. It was about having the courage to be vulnerable, the strength to accept help, and the wisdom to recognize that true partnership was the foundation of everything worth building. Their story was proof that love, real love, was not about grand gestures or passionate declarations alone. It was about showing up every day, working side by side, facing challenges together, and choosing each other over and over again. It was about respecting each other's pride while still offering support, about maintaining individual strength while building collective power, about being two whole people who chose to become stronger together. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all, not just the successful ranch or the thriving family, but the example they set of what love could be when it was built on the right foundation. Patrick and Violet Young showed everyone who knew them that partnership and romance were not mutually exclusive, that respect and passion could coexist, and that the most beautiful love stories were the ones where both people emerged stronger, more complete, and more fully themselves. Their story ended the way all the best stories do, with two people who loved each other completely, who built something beautiful together, and who left the world better than they found it. They proved that sometimes the greatest act of love was not saving someone, but offering them the tools to save themselves. And they showed that pride, when channeled correctly, was not an obstacle to love but a foundation for it, because true partnership required two people who knew their own worth and chose to combine their strengths rather than diminish themselves. Patrick and Violet's love story was a testament to the power of respect, the beauty of equality, and the transformative magic that happened when two people chose to be true partners in every aspect of life. It was a story worthy of the Wild West, full of courage and determination, and the kind of love that built empires and legacies. And it was a story that deserved to be remembered, told and retold, a reminder that the best kind of love was the kind that lifted both people up and created something greater than either could have built alone.